Hello and welcome everybody to this online recording of identifying and addressing mental health needs in schools. My name's Claire Stubbs and I'm a counselling psychologist. So the outline of today's session is we're going to think about our understanding of mental health. We're going to consider how important language is around mental health, and then we're going to look at the difference between sort of a mental health approach and a resilience-based approach, and then tie that all together in terms of then thinking about a whole school approach to promoting mental health and resilience, and think about some ideas in terms of what you can focus on in schools. We'll have a case example that we'll think through together, and then also take some different presentations, so like anxiety and domestic violence, and then thinking about how you can focus on them in an individual way and also in a whole school approach. Okay, so the bonus about this session obviously is that ensure that you're nice and comfortable. You've got yourself a nice hot drink if you need one, and then obviously you can pause it anytime and take a breather. So, and I definitely recommend that because there is a lot of information that we're going to be thinking about during this time. So, and it's probably going to be sort of a couple of hours. So yeah, just make sure you look after yourself as well, because obviously we're talking about mental health, and we know that 1 in 6 of us are affected by mental health. So it may be that obviously you're approaching this as a practitioner, yet we're also then reflecting on ourselves as well as thinking about the people that we love and care for, or who are in our immediate family as well. So just be really mindful to attend to those different parts of you, and like I say, look after yourself in the session. Okay, so I'm going to have a little icebreaker. So this is something that we think about in terms of the practitioner training, resilience training that we do, and there'll also be a video, online video on that session that you can access as well. So I just want you, like I say, and to just pause the video, but imagine that you're a tree. So trees take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. And when we're in the helping professions, we also take in the carbon dioxide of others and then give off oxygen in our support of others too. So, like I say, just take a moment. And the wonderful thing about this activity is you can approach it in any way that feels right for you, because it's really thinking about what supports your tree. So what are the branches, if you like, that keep you steady in your work? What tends to sort of make it wobble? What do you notice that you struggle with, or kind of presses, I guess, isn't it, on your own parts that might be vulnerable? And we all have those, and it's just really important then that we sort of have an understanding. How sustainable or robust does your tree feel, and what might it need more of? So yeah, like I say, just take say 5 minutes and to just pause the video at this point, and then you can draw a tree, or if you've got kind of glue and stickers, and you can be really creative, or you might just want to reflect on those questions. If it was me doing this training, I struggle with my creativity part, so I'd probably just sit and reflect on this. So either is absolutely fine. So yeah, so just take a minute, take 5 minutes to do that, because it's really important as well. What you're doing now is then investing in your own resilience just by taking that time to think about it. Okay, so welcome back. So I'd love, if only we weren't online, because at this point in the training I really love seeing people's trees and what they've come up with. It's always really fascinating, and I never kind of cease to learn something about what people use in support of themselves. So it's just thinking about myself, for example. So what supports my tree? I guess over the years I've really learned that, you know, kind of lots of time out, just breaks during the day, wherever I can take them is really important, and just getting outside if I can, and having that fresh air, isn't it, that burst of serotonin, you know, by being in the fresh air. And then I come back and I'm much more refreshed, you know, for kind of the afternoon ahead, if you like. So, and particularly now as well, working at home is ever more important, I'm finding, during COVID with working at home. So that's really important. What makes my tree wobble? I guess what I know is those basics, I guess, isn't it, that we're going to be thinking about in terms of resilience. I know myself that if I let, like I say, the kind of the exercise or the healthy eating, you know, drop off, then I often notice, I joke with the family, like if I'm really overly aware of clutter and things around the house, I know for me that means that inside, that I'm feeling quite full. So it's really important to be mindful of that, isn't it? Like, when do you know in yourself that your tree is starting to wobble? What are the signs? And then what does it tell you about what you might need more of, or what you might need to reduce a little bit, just so you've got that space to kind of breathe. And you know, because like we're saying, isn't it, we're containers in this work, so we hold a lot, and it's so important. You know, often say you can't pour from an empty cup, so it's so important that we look after ourselves first and foremost. So yeah, so I hope that you discovered something about yourself in that you hadn't realised before, or maybe it's just strengthened something that you already knew, and then thinking about what you might need to do differently going forward. So thinking about mental health then, so we're going to start first and foremost thinking about the language that we use around mental health. So because mental health, the language that we use in mental health is so crucial, you know, in terms of that, isn't it, informing the stigma that exists around mental health. So again, just want you to take say 4 or 5 minutes, and just pause the video and think about all the negative words that you've heard associated with mental health. Then think about the positive words that you've heard, and then any neutral terms. And then also think about any ways in your school, for example, that we can use language to empower, rather than it being disempowering. So like I say, just take 5 minutes to just pause the video now and then have a think through those things. So welcome back. So yeah, I'm imagining what that was like, and actually it can be really tough when we really connect with some of these really derogatory terms that we hear around mental health, psycho or nutter, or crazy, and we hear them all too often, sadly. And the important thing is, you know, time and time again, and if you're interested, and there's lots of research on the internet that shows, actually, particularly with young people, you know, the stigma that exists around mental health, and language, like we say, is a key part of that, is then such a deterrent for young people in terms of accessing services, for fear that they too will be labelled in a particular way by their peers, or yeah, because of the, I guess, isn't it, the language then creates, you know, can create this internal shame if you're seen to be struggling. And it can be really subtle, I think, as well, the language that we use. So in my profession, for example, in counselling psychology, you know I work with colleagues who, you know, refer to people that they're working with as clients, for example, or patients, and that language in itself is just immediately very disempowering, because it just kind of places the person, you know, that's kind of on the receiving end of the service, you know, as a sort of almost like a passive receiver of the service, yet also, you know, kind of being less than in some way, because they're struggling, and it just immediately then creates that hierarchy and that power imbalance in the work, as opposed to actually we're all equal, we're all in this together, and actually we've just, you know, gone along different paths and, you know, kind of fallen down different holes along the way that have had an impact, and then obviously, you know, holding that social inequalities piece, that actually not everybody has access to services and support, to kind of then enable them, you know, to kind of get through that or reduce the odds in terms of their resilience. So yeah, so then, you know, just more and more, isn't it, language, and dispelling those kind of you know, kind of awful terms, and, you know, reducing and just doing what we can, like making a commitment to do what we can, to change the tide around language. So other ideas that schools have come up with before, I guess, is using assemblies, you know, to kind of make a point around language, and then kind of helping, isn't it, young people or staff or everyone really in the whole school system to kind of have a real think about the impact that it has when we use derogatory language. And like I was saying before, you know, the fact that 1 in 6 of us is affected, you know, by mental health, and they'll, you know, it's likely that there'll be somebody for whom then they hear that, and it can have, you know, a really sore impact. And then, like we say, you know, that further impact of not being able to, or not feeling like they can access services or ask for help. So you can use assemblies, you can use tutor groups, posters around the school, you know, so that actually people are constantly exposed to these different messages. I think having anonymous channels in the school so that young people can feed back or ask for help, you know, in a way that's really confidential. So like I say, that it's anonymous, again, can be really beneficial too. Or if young people are kind of being exposed to challenging language, that offers another route to be kind of feeding back, you know, where that's happening, so that then it can be really compassionately challenged to the people that are involved. So let's think about how we're defining mental health. So we've got a couple of definitions here. So the first one, mental health is not just the absence of mental disorder. It's defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realises his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And the last one here, my little button on the computer, is blocking it slightly. So you care about yourself and you care for yourself. You love yourself, not hate yourself. You look after your physical health, eat well, sleep well, exercise, and enjoy yourself. So yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? So if we just look at both of those, I think actually, yes, so in some ways they both lend themselves to sort of, actually, if people my experience is anyway, if people are in a place where they can work productively and fruitfully, for example, and are able to make a contribution to his or her community, then their mental health is in quite an optimal place if they're able to do that. And likewise, if they're able, if they've got that capacity, isn't it, to kind of eat well, sleep well, exercise, and enjoy yourself, then furthermore, yes, I think then their mental health is in a relatively optimal or good place. And I guess, isn't it, it's like the last one, for example, is, yes, these are the things that we would hope, we would kind of be encouraging if people are struggling in terms of their mental health. That actually, yes, it's important that we care about ourselves. We kind of look after our physical health as much as our mental health. And yeah, all of those things are really important in terms of supporting a positive state, if you like, of well-being. But in some ways, they're kind of, my sense is that they're almost quite idealistic definitions. And we'll think about it when we think about resilience, don't necessarily then, like we're saying, kind of take into consideration social inequalities when thinking about mental health, and then the impact then that can have. So again, just take a few minutes, just pause the video at this point, and then just have a think about what you make of these definitions too. Okay, so then thinking about how we're defining resilience, and there's a few definitions here that we often use in training. So the first one, resilience is evident where people with persistently few assets and resources and major vulnerabilities have better outcomes than we might expect given their circumstances and in comparison to what we know happens with other children in their contexts. So that's the first one, and that's by Angie Hart, Derek Blinko and Helen Thomas, and I'd highly recommend Resilient Therapy, where that definition has come from, the book Resilient Therapy by those authors. The second one, Beating the Odds whilst also changing the odds, and that's Angie Hart and Emily Gagnon. And then the last one, so resilience is overcoming adversity whilst also potentially subtly altering or even dramatically transforming aspects of that adversity. So that's Hart and Gagnon, 2016 also. So again, just take a minute to take these definitions in. What do you make of them? How do they land with you? Which one stands out? Which one are you most drawn to? And then just pause the video here, like I say, for a few minutes so that you can take those in. So welcome back. So our experience in training often when we present these definitions, sometimes people struggle a little bit with this one. I think some of the language, so particularly here where people with persistently few assets and resources and major vulnerabilities have better outcomes than we might expect. So what's being alluded to here, I guess, is that social inequalities piece. So that's what we're talking about in terms of few assets and resources. Isn't it? If we grow up in a context of disadvantage, then ultimately those children and young people are going to be at a disadvantage in terms of the assets that support their resilience, such as problem solving, or being able to self-soothe, being able to hold a different perspective, for example. So they're going to be at a disadvantage in terms of those not only internal resources, but also the external resources that they're able to access. But actually then, so what the definition follows on to say is then given all of that, they have better outcomes than we might expect, given their start in life or given their circumstances, and then in comparison to what we know happens with other children in those contexts. So then, and then the second one is, again, really strengthening this social inequalities and social justice piece now. So resilience is not only beating the odds, but it's also changing the odds too. So what we're talking about here is the beating the odds is the individual work, and then the changing the odds is what we do socially in the community, you know, that the child is living in, but also the wider social context that will also be having an impact, for example, on their access to mechanisms that support their resilience. And then again, this is further echoed in this last definition. So resilience is overcoming adversity whilst also potentially subtly altering or even dramatically transforming aspects of that adversity. So the thing about resilience is that we need two ingredients, if you like, when we're thinking about resilience. So there has to be an element of an adverse experience that's taken place, and obviously, you know, isn't it, in our work, you know, we need, it's so important to hold that individual piece when we're talking about adverse, because what might be adverse for me might be very different to somebody else, so that holding that subjectivity is really important. And then the second part is, you know, doing, like I say, better than we'd expect. So those are the two things that need to be in place when we're thinking about resilience. So then that last one, like I say, you know, is actually, it's the capacity to overcome adversity, yet also what, you know, what we're passionate about at Boingboing is also then transforming aspects of that adversity in terms of that social inequalities, and, you know, transforming that into our practice in terms of social justice work. So obviously psychology offers significant contributions in terms of our understanding of mental health. So we're just going to think those through, and then that leads us towards then thinking about what might be missing in terms of psychology, and then thinking about where resilience or a resilience approach steps in, and why we feel passionate about a resilience-based approach to mental health in schools. So what does psychology offer then to our understanding of mental health? So it gives us that understanding of how personality is shaped, and then what happens when things go wrong. It helps us think about what drives us as human beings in terms of what our basic needs are, and then, like I say, kind of then how we transfer those once those needs are met, and then how we can transfer that into the things that drive us as human beings. It helps us think through the contribution of neuroscience and the impact of the brain, and how that impacts on when we're working with people. And we've got lots of seminars as part of this series in terms of like trauma or school refusal and anxiety, for example, working with children when they harm themselves, and all of those include an element of thinking about what's happening in the brain. Psychology helps us in terms of thinking about therapeutic approaches that work in terms of individual healing. Any external contributions that may impact on our work, such as attachment style. So obviously it's really important to understand the it can be really important to understand the attachment style of our children and young people, because ultimately that's going to impact on our work, and then the importance in terms of relationships and our sense of belonging. So how does our personality develop then? So we're all born into this world with a genetic influence, if you like, or a temperament that then is shaped through our relationships in the environment. So I don't know if you want to take just a couple of minutes as well to just think about the nature-nurture position, and then just maybe just think about where are you now in terms of thinking about that. Are you in the same place that you were originally? I know that I kind of used to really sit in the nurture camp, and then as my work has developed over time and working with people more and more, I can really see as well. And I think just in my own family, so me and my brother obviously reared in the same environment, but very, very different. So that's that fascinating piece, isn't it, when you're working, say, like I say, with two siblings or who are reared in the same environment, actually respond and cope very differently. So so just have a think about that and how your perspective might have evolved or changed over time and what's influenced that. So thinking about that then, what do you imagine are the 4 basic needs that we're aiming to meet when we first come into this world? So like I say, just take a few minutes to just pause the video and then write those things down. Okay, so hopefully you managed to get a nice cup of tea or something whilst you were doing that. So welcome back. So what are our basic needs then? So to attach and bond to a primary caregiver, to become our own person through exploration and self-determined activities. We're trying to build these internal psychic boundaries, and then ultimately as well the need for an attuned relationship, and then all of these things, isn't it, help us develop a sense of who we are, how we relate, and then, like I say, once those needs that we have continually are met, and then we're very much driven to go out, kind of be able to separate from our primary caregiver and then go out into the world and be who we are and achieve what we want to achieve. And often it's not always that straightforward, sadly. So our personality is formed through the child's attempt to meet those basic needs, and then the frustrations and traumas that they encounter for their environment, their instinctual response to that, and then strategies that are, to kind of manage, that are offered and accepted by the environment they're living in, which then become accepted inside themselves in relation to their own struggles. So I'll say that again now in English. So our personality is shaped, by our attempt, isn't it, as children, to, like I say, to meet those basic needs that we listed before. Then obviously it's not always, the provision of those needs is not always available. So then it's frustrating. There can also be trauma that the child experiences in the environment. They'll have an instinctual response to that trauma, as well as they will have seen strategies being demonstrated by those primary caregivers, either like individually or in relationship as well. Just thinking about domestic violence relationships. So those strategies are offered and accepted in that environment. So for the child, it's like, okay, that's what they know. and then they become accepted inside themselves too, in relation to their own struggles. So whether that's not feeling, whether that's getting angry when they're feeling, whether that's withdrawing and shutting down, so like I say, depending on what they've seen witnessed or what they feel has been promoted in that environment, then that will become a way that they kind of then manage and cope. So again, just take a minute to pause, and you might want to reflect on your own experience as a child and thinking about any coping strategies that you learned in your environments, or thinking about children that you work with, any coping strategies that they bring into school that they've clearly learned in the environments that they're living in. Okay, welcome back. So what else makes a difference? So the timing and repetition of any traumatic incidents or experience. Obviously, if it's just a one-off, then if then there could be an opportunity for that to be worked through. So then it's going to be very different. But the age at which these traumatic experiences happen, is really important. I mean, 0 to 7 is crucial. So as soon as we're in the world, we're absorbing information and absorbing experiences. So, and then of course, isn't it, if things continue to happen time and time again, then that's when they become internalized and part of the child's kind of beliefs, or become aspects of their personality. And like I just said, the timing effect of any intervention, if at all. So obviously it'll really make a difference if there's a really positive grandma, for example, that the child is able to go and stay with often, or if an external service is available, then that of course can make a difference. Like I said before, the child's personality too, and how therefore how they respond, which brings in that nature piece. And then the combination of traumatic experiences or incidences. So sadly, if there's more than one, and then how often that happens, and then that can be reinforcing. So then what does that result in if the child has a less than optimal experience? So it results in those early needs that we were talking about being unmet. And then, of course, isn't it, if they haven't been met, then the child or young person may also ignore their needs because the lesson is, I'm not important, or my needs are not important. So then they too just continue to go to be pushed away, and then obviously the issue becomes more and more entrenched. It can result in what we call insecure attachment patterns that then we take into other relationships, because obviously, isn't it, those first experiences, those first relationships are what we're absorbing, and that's what we look to in terms of trying to get a sense of who we are and how we need to relate. And ultimately what we're doing is we're sort of saying to ourselves, okay, I'll be okay if I'll be okay if I don't feel, if that's what the learning has been. If there hasn't been a response, then it's like, I'll be okay if I don't feel, or I'll be okay if I'm not too much, or I'll be okay if I don't make a fuss. So like I say, from birth, children are learning, or babies are learning how they need to be in the world, and forming that sense in terms of their own attachment style and how it is that they need to be in order to relate. And so then, like I mentioned before, children will also then develop beliefs about themselves and the world. So these beliefs could be, and I'm sure you've seen them in your work, So things like I'm not good enough, or I need to be strong, or I need to try harder in order to be loved. Yeah, and so on and so on. Or it could also then be, like I say, kind of the world isn't safe, or people in the world are only nice to you if you're really nice to them. So like I say, we kind of form that impression and kind of beliefs about how we need to be in order to be safe in the world, and that may be changing who we are, and also then kind of not just, you know, those immediate relationships, but also outside of the family too. So yeah, so like I say, enlisting those protective defences in order to feel okay. So it may be, you know, protective defences include things like trying to be perfect, overworking, people pleasing, like I say, not feeling. You know, there are a number of things that people put in place in order to then keep those limiting beliefs at bay, so that they're not activated. Because, isn't it, if you, for example, they're activated when say for example someone challenges a piece of work that the child's done, then immediately that brings to the fore this idea of I'm not good enough, or you know, I failed in some way. So so then once those defences have been challenged, then it can be very painful, because it touches on those early wounds. The basic fault describes how what children do is in order to protect the family unit. So the child may be feeling incredibly angry and let down by the parents. Yeah, actually that's risky to feel that way, because you know, despite what's happened, you know, it's too risky to kind of direct all that anger and that hurt at the parents, because actually in some way, even though it's not logical or rational, the child believes that they could destroy them with the strength of their feeling. So, and when your parents are the only attachment figures that you have, you want to keep them safe. So you know, so rather than direct it out, the child says to themselves that there's something wrong with me instead. And if you want to read more about that, the author is Barlent, and it's called The Basic Fault. And then the other way in which we cope if things have gone wrong is through what we call the narcissistic wound. And I'll really want to just attend to this for a second, because actually I feel it's really misunderstood. So when, you know, when children haven't had enough attention, or haven't had, you know, those kind of early like being mirrored, you know, like being adored, you know, kind of the other reflecting back on them and just, you know, showing them that they're desired and loved, and then the only way the child can cope with that is to just take that back inside and actually make themselves the priority. So then it becomes that there must be something wrong with other people, because actually it's too painful to consider that it may be that the issue is with them. Hope this is making sense so far. So don't forget to be looking after yourselves, and take a breather if you need to. Pop to the toilet, or go and get a glass of water, because yeah, there's a lot here. So then, in addition to that, so thinking about those children that experience trauma, and Bessel van der Kolk, who is a pioneer in the trauma field, he describes trauma as pushing us beyond our normal coping capacities, something that we cannot process or deal with. So if there's a traumatic experience that occurs, then the child or young person may shut down. So totally, like what we call dissociate, which is switch off, disconnect, you know, kind of, it becomes too overwhelming for the system. So a bit like, isn't it, when the computer gets too hot and there's too much going on, so it just switches off, and the human system does that too. So it becomes overwhelmed, and like I say, cannot be processed or dealt with by the psyche. So, and then the system will do whatever it can in order to cope with that. Now, if you're more interested in thinking about trauma and how you can support children who have experienced trauma, we've also recorded a trauma part 1 and part 2 session, so you can access that, and we go into more detail then about trauma and the impact, particularly neurologically, and then also the fight or flight system, and then thinking as well how we can help children make sense of those systems, and then how we can support them too. So yeah, so just have a think again about what traumatic experiences you face with the children that you're working with. What do you notice about them? Do you notice that they need something very different in terms of support? And then, like I say, if you want more information, that's all contained in that Twilight sessions on trauma. So when does it become, so when those early experiences become a mental health issue? So when the difficulties are so deeply entrenched in the person's system. So when they're so deeply entrenched, it's hard, there's a lack of flexibility. So it's really hard in any kind of intervention or therapeutic work to see movement. That's what we mean in that, because actually, like I say, the difficulties have become so deep, and then the coping strategies or the way of adapting, people gain things as well from in terms of reinforcing particular beliefs about themselves. Isn't it? Let's take people pleasing, for example. Actually then people are used to being seen in a particular way and being responded to in a particular way. So then the thought of giving up people pleasing and actually being more true to themselves is risky. So then these things take time to disentangle. So with children, and again, isn't it, we go back to that kind of point about how many times have they experienced a trauma, and when and at what age. Obviously we need to hold that, yet the sooner we can do this work with children, and the more proactive we are in terms of having a whole school approach, then the hope is that it'll be less likely that those difficulties are so deeply entrenched. Yet, like I say, it's important to hold on an individual level the repetition of the trauma, the kind of trauma, and who the child is and their personality, etc. So yeah, when emotions or feelings are really suppressed, so if they're pushed down, because like I say, it's not safe to feel them in the environment or to express them, then the term depression comes from the Latin term, which is deprimere, which means to push down. So that's how people end up becoming depressed, because the feelings and emotions are literally depressed. So if that's happened enough, then obviously it can then have a real impact on the system. When the trauma is repetitive enough too, and then the psyche will find ways around it to cope, but also often those ways around obviously then reinforce the original wounds. So let's go back to the people pleasing example. So I people please because it feels safe, and also the belief is I'm not important. So every time the person is people pleasing, they're of course they're feeling safe in the world on one level, yet also it's every time that little one inside is getting the message, other people are more important, other people are more important. So that's where it goes into and kind of reinforces that original wound. So obviously with children, they have, you know, in the other seminars, you'll hear more about the brain. So, but I guess, you know, we have an emotional part of our brain, and which is called the amygdala. And then we have the frontal lobe, which is our logical, rational decision-making part. And of course, children anyway are all emotional brain, up until really the sort of the ages of sort of 10 and 11 is when that frontal lobe starts coming online. And then what you'll hear in the trauma seminar is that then even more so when children are traumatized, they struggle to build the bridge that most of us build between the logical and emotional brain. So even more so then, children that have experienced trauma need our support to encourage that bridge building between their logical and rational parts of their brain. So, and again, we talk more about that in the other seminars that actually focus on anxiety, children that are harming themselves, or the trauma seminars, for example. So it's all in there at your fingertips. Okay. So then, why are we promoting a resilience-based approach for you? So like I mentioned before, obviously social inequalities, you know, plays a huge impact in terms of people's access to mental health provision or support. And then obviously as well, if we live in disadvantage or an area of disadvantage, then that obviously increases the likelihood of difficulties or mental health difficulties, because I guess, isn't it, becomes a legacy or an intergenerational issue of difficulties and challenges being passed down. So, and a traditional mental health approach wouldn't necessarily take that into consideration. So I certainly know for myself that in my training, yes, I was made aware that there was, the social inequalities piece, yet we weren't necessarily then trained as to how we would work with that in our practice. Whereas the resilience-based approach that we're going to be talking through with you today, that's at the forefront. That's, that runs through the approach. And like we say, because it's so important in terms of then increasing the odds that people have in terms of promoting their resilience. So a resilience-based approach is uses more empowering language as well. So we're moving away from, like I was saying earlier, talking about people, we talk about people as people, or, we talk about this individual that I'm working with, rather than actually this client or this patient. Or this person who's got borderline personality disorder, for example. So, it's much more empowering, the language that we use, gets away from that kind of language that's actually, like I say, kind of embeds that power, power imbalance. Thank you. So, and when we're talking about a resilience-based approach, we're talking about co-production. So from the outset as well. So, drawing on approaches. So nothing about me is, without me. So making sure that children or parents, carers, foster parents, whoever is in that system for the child, the caretaker, all staff, the teaching assistant, that everybody has a say, because everyone's got such a valuable contribution to make. So then it's really important that everyone's perspective is included, from the outset, always. because, like I say, everyone's got such a different lens that they're approaching things at, and each lens is just really important. So whereas, again, like I say, with a traditional mental health approach, that wouldn't necessarily be happening. So, and we talk about, in our resilience-based approach, we talk about that it's actually embedded therapy rather than just working with the individual. So it actually works across the whole system. So then it's embedded throughout the child's life, if you like. So rather than, like I say, just working with the child on helping them cope or self-soothe or working on those limiting beliefs, it actually is embedded across the whole of the system. And we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later as well. So yeah, so then when you put resilience and psychology together, so what we're talking about here is much more of a community psychology approach, because actually we believe that to just do, like I say, to just work individually also then undermines the work that needs to happen, not just in the family or not just in the immediate community, but also on a wider societal level too, because it clearly has an impact, and also then creates those barriers for people to access services. If you think about, so I did my research for my doctorate on looking at young people who are involved in crime, for example, and actually, we live in a society that is more focused on punishing young people rather than rehabilitation. So then a young person who has already experienced that disadvantage in their family context, then they kind of have a criminal record, and then again, isn't it, the barriers to trying to get work and improve their resilience odds are just against them socially, rather than, like I say, an alternative where we work as a community to kind of help these young people in terms of nurturing their trajectory after prison. So very, and then it's really hard to get housing, so that they might end up going back to where they lived previously, and that could be a big part of the problem. So that's just one example there, I guess, about just how much the social context has an impact. So this is the resilience framework, and this is the approach that underpins, I guess, the therapeutic approach that we know as resilient therapy. So I may refer to it as RT for short at times. So the framework came out of lots of research and lots of consultations and practice groups, and with parents, children, carers, foster carers, grandparents who are looking after children, because there was a need for a resilience-based intervention. So Angie Hart, who worked on the framework with Derek Blinko and Helen Thomas, and like I say, all these parents and carers and children and young people, felt there was a real absence of a intervention around resilience that then put that research that existed into practice. So here, is the outcome of all that work into 5 component parts. So so good enough housing, for example, enough money to live. These are all what we call resilient moves. So a resilient move is something that you can do in support of a parent or a family or a child or a young person, or even as a whole school community. So, and like I say, so has taken all the resilience research and then transferred that into practice. So I'm just going to go through that with you now. So here we've got the basics, and this is where we see the social inequalities agenda really running through the approach, in terms of, you know, thinking through is the house or is this the family situation, is it good enough, you know, because again, isn't it, if you've got a child, you know, that's coming to school and the family doesn't have enough money to live, for example, you know, are they able to buy uniform, or you know, are they coming to school and have they had breakfast, you know, things like that. So the thing about RT is that it gets down, you know, to the really nitty-gritty as well, and that's what I mean about embedded therapy. So, you know, because actually an individual approach wouldn't necessarily consider these things, and it's not just about considering them, it's also then taking action, so putting them into our approach, and in terms of then what we feel we need to do for that child, family, or young person. So then we've got belonging, and belonging has taken the research from attachment theory as well. Yet also, I guess it's kind of built on that. So like saying earlier, in terms of attachment theory, you know, is great and has really informed our understanding. And also, it's not just about those early attachments. We know that now from research, that it's not just about those early attachment relationships that are important. It's also the attachments in later life. You know, there's other attachments that children have with yourselves, for example, in school. And then, you know, the research also talks about how key, almost like adolescence is another opportunity to repair what might have happened in those early years, particularly from that sort of between 11 and 13, because the brain, again, is reorganizing itself. And actually during that time, it goes back to being how it was, you know, when the child was very little. So like I say, it's an opportunity to make a second impression, if you like. So that's the belonging compartment. And also here it talks about, so in responsibilities and obligations, for example, thinking about how we help children and young people, you know, also take responsibility, you know, for themselves too, and thinking about what they're, and that's here as well in the core self. And actually things like making friends and mixing with other children, we can't take these things for granted, particularly, isn't it, as well, if they, you know, if there's been a disadvantaged start in life, then actually they might not necessarily have those social skills. So we might, you know, we might need to be teaching those. Then we've got learning, and learning is called learning purposefully as opposed to education. So because not all children and young people have access to mainstream education. So it's about, again, like here, for example, how can we make school or college life work as well as possible? And obviously we'll be thinking about that in terms of a whole school approach. Just helping the child organise him or herself. And again, isn't it, if you've got a child who's living in poverty or disadvantage, you know, can they even get to school in the morning? Do they have an alarm clock? And making a resilient move, like buying an alarm clock for the child, could just be the very thing that means that they're able to get to school in the morning. If home life is stressful and chaotic, then that could, you know, that could just be invaluable. So again, it's really focusing down onto the nitty-gritty in terms of what needs to be in place, you know, what's happening in that child or young person's world, and then actually what do they need in terms of those resilient moves. Then you've got coping, and coping, I guess, is as it says on the tin. So, how do we support children and young people to cope? Problem solving, the research around problem solving and resilience says actually problem solving is one of the best things. It's one of the most important resilient moves. Obviously, leaning on others when necessary. This can be really hard, again, isn't it? If you've had stressful attachments or where people have let you down, then to open up and trust on and allow yourself to lean on other people can be really hard. So it's about then what work, isn't it, needs to be done here in terms of supporting children to trust, and then we'll come to the noble truths in a second, where something like commitment. So isn't it, if we're committing to children and young people and we're seeing that work through, then that can actually really help in terms of supporting them to lean on others. And lastly, core self, and this is probably the compartment, where we do the most individual work, and around, and I guess, this is really important, isn't it, in terms of instilling a sense of hope, so as a person in that child's life, how do you give them hope? Like I say, are we consistent? Are we committed? Do we see the work through? Because I think we underestimate the impact of that, for example. And also, or things might be really difficult now. And also, was there a time when things were better? What was happening then? Or, okay, things are really difficult right now and you're in the best place. We're going to attend to this now. So there's ways when we can, facilitate that hope. And lastly, and this is really important, so there are tried and tested treatments for specific issues. So we need to use them. And this is where, isn't it, if you're noticing that a particular issue, like I was saying before, is really entrenched and actually might need a more specific intervention from an external service like CAMS, for example, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, then obviously it's important, to kind of refer on or, liaise with those services too, to see. I mean, the reason we're here talking about the importance of a whole school approach is because actually there's huge waiting times in services like CAMS. So, isn't it, as much as, we can try and be proactive and do this work, in-house. Of course, there are times when we do need to enlist these other services as well. So then down the bottom here, you've got the 4 noble truths. I'm hoping that you can see them on your screen. If not, you can also download a copy of the resilience framework from Boingboing. You see the website address there, so it's boingboing.org.uk. So first and foremost, you've got, so the noble truths are like the values, if you like, that run throughout the framework. So things like, so it's like the philosophy of the framework, the bread and butter, we call it. So things like accepting. So of course, isn't it, not people don't live their lives sometimes in the way that we live our lives or that we would see fit. Yeah, everybody is on their own path and ultimately doing their very best with the resources that they have. So then it's about how we accept, we meet them where they're at and not where we're at. And again, isn't it, it's about what support do you need in place to ensure that you've got the capacity to do that, because sometimes it is really hard and we do struggle, and it's, it's hard to kind of be with people fully where they're at if we're struggling with their circumstances. Or so that supervision, support, or peer supervision, if you can put that in place, for being able to be in that place is really, really crucial, because sometimes we can't accept, and I think it's important to have a space that you can share with your colleagues, or like I say, your senior management team, where you might be really struggling and what's kind of what's blocking you being able to accept, isn't it? Because we do all have our own blocks. It's all part and parcel of being a practitioner because we're human as well. So then you've got conserving, and this is like the jam in the jar. So what are we going to preserve, if you like, that's worked really well in the past, and or that we might need to hold on to? So is there something that's working really well in the child system that, like say, you want to increase or build on? Like say, it could be a really positive grandma, but you notice that grandma's struggling, she might need some respite every now and then. So it's like, actually being able to put that in place could do wonders, for the rest of the child's kind of sphere, if you like, isn't it, or their opportunities. So then you've got commitment, which, like I said before, is about the importance, isn't it, of if we're starting this work, we need to be able to then see it through too. And, commitment can be really hard in these times because of funding being cut. And I usually talk to people that I work with about the fact that, at some point our work will come to an end. Yeah, hopefully, can we both make a commitment to honouring that and, trying to do that in a way that is caring and respectful, and just so that it's not cut off, because, people have really so often kind of difficult experiences around endings. So it's really important, like I say, to kind of be able to see things through and give a different experience. Then we've got enlisting here, and that was, like I say earlier, and actually, that's about, isn't it, this, we can't do this work by ourselves, and actually what we're promoting here is the opposite of that in terms of a whole school approach, but actually and then carefully enlisting, isn't it, like who else do we need to bring in the child's environment that actually might be able to support a piece of work, or is there someone in the community that can help? But again, isn't it, it's just making sure that that's carefully thought through so that it is of benefit for the child or the family. And also sometimes I say to people, as a psychologist, for example, my go-tos could be core self and coping, and the stuff here around belonging. So I have to then really enlist those other parts of me so that then I'm attending to these aspects here, and learning as well, to be honest, for me. So it's like knowing, and when we think about the case example a bit later, we'll think about, where are you naturally drawn to going? Like I say, these are my natural go-tos. So then it's about how do I help myself, kind of, and keeping the framework at hand is really helpful for that, so that then I kind of am mindful to pay attention to these aspects. So again, what I'd like you to do now is just pause the video for about 10 minutes, and then just reflect on someone in your school community, and maybe think about them. So you can use the framework as an assessment tool. So looking at what's in place already, what's going really well, so that'll be your greens, if you like, and then what might have had some attention but now is on hold, so that'll be your ambers. And then lastly, thinking about if there are things that haven't had any focus, so that'll be your reds. So going through each of these, like I say, and thinking them through in relation to that child or young person, and would you say that they're at a green, or are they amber, or are they red? So just take, like I say, a good kind of 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes to do that, and if you've got felt tip pens at home in those different colours, that'll make your life a lot easier, because then you can look at the framework as a visual map when you look back, and actually then it's useful to go back to. Okay, so hope you found the Resilient Framework exercise interesting. And like I say, kind of people find it's really useful in terms of them mapping out, where a child or a young person is. And also you can use it in a staff meeting as well to think about where the school is, for example, on thinking through those different moves and what the school is currently offering in terms of those remedies, or what you might need to do more of, and just be flexible with it and play around with it. So things like good enough housing, for example, you can look at that in terms of your the rooms at school, like the tutor rooms, or is there, things like being safe, for example. Are there safe places in the school that the child or a young person can go to if they feel distressed? How are you supporting children around their obligations and responsibilities? If they get into trouble, is there capacity, for people to just help children understand what happened, rather than those kind of traditional punishment methods? It's like, actually, how can we help children learn? So yes, you can really use the framework as a great way of mapping where the school is at on those different resilient moves. So just have a think in relation to the framework as well about what individual moves you're making in support of children and young people already. And I'm sure, what we often find in training when we look at the framework is, people saying, actually, I'm already doing this, or I'm already doing this. And I guess what's great about the framework, isn't it, is it just shows you then, okay, I hadn't actually thought about that. And now I will think differently about that and include that as part of my plan. And the great thing as well, and I say this a bit later, is always just whatever you're thinking about, just always include the child and young person, or the family, the mum, the dad, whoever's in that child's system, because actually just making sure then, isn't it, that what you're planning is really based on their needs and is really going to work with them. And the framework is just, a really accessible tool, I think. So it's easy to explain to people. And then, like I say, then you can sit and generate ideas together about what needs to be done. So when we're working in terms of resilience, we stress the importance about working with the whole system. So we use Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, to support this thinking. So because this then supports an understanding of the issue from all dimensions of the young person's life. So then, as it says there, resilient moves then cover all bases, as opposed to just being simply individualized. And the research shows actually that when we kind of like I say, use this embedded therapy approach, then children often heal best, because we're attending to all of their needs as opposed to just those individual needs. So if we look at this model then, so we've got the first layer is the microsystem, and this is the child's immediate environment, so their family, schools, peers, the neighbourhood, any religious affiliations, and you've got the child or young person there at the centre. Then you've got the mesosystem, which is the different parts of the child's immediate environment interacting together. So how the family, will come in, like parents come in to interact with the school, and then you've got the workplace and the neighbourhood there. Then you've got the exosystem, which is like people and places that have an indirect impact on the child's life. So for example, this could be mum's job. So the child might not be coming into direct contact with the people at mum's work, but mum's work is having an indirect impact on the child's life and their experience. Then you've got the macro system. So this is like the government, the education system, the political system, cultural values, etc., etc. And then you have the chrono system, and this is the influence of change and constancy in a child's environment over time. I mean, and gosh, there's not a better time, is there, to be thinking about, 2020, for example, and what children might remember in terms of having to socially distance from each other, and the impact of that. The chrono system also includes things like going through puberty or losing family members. So it's that, the impact of things that happen over time, or it could interlink with the macro system in terms of a change over time, in terms of cultural values, for example. Let's say, how kind of women's role in society might have changed over time. And again, how that impacts on the child or the young person. So again, it's just a really useful tool for analysing a child or young person's environment, and helping us then to decide where we concentrate our efforts. And like I say, it's so important in terms of then thinking about what was the resources or resilient moves we might make across the system, because there could be an issue at mum's work that actually mum is struggling with, for example, that's having a real impact on the child, yet who is attending to that, and actually what support does mum have in place to help her with that, yet like I say, could be having a massive impact on the child experience. So, and I'll talk about, so don't worry, there's lots of further reading that you can do to think through these different models. For example, we've got the Mental Health in Schools toolkit, and that really goes into detail about Bronfenbrenner's model. So if there's anything that you feel you've missed in this presentation, there's a lot of reading that you can do, so don't worry, and we'll come to further reading at the end. But just maybe, just came to me, just have a think now, just sit, you might think about the child that you decided to focus on in terms of the resilience framework, and then think about if there's anything else that you're aware of in terms of this model that helps you think them through, and also then helps you think, okay, yes, that might be important to attend to. Okay, so then thinking then about a whole school approach to mental health. So this this model here has been taken from the Public Health England's approach in terms of developing whole school approaches. So the aspects that you see there, so focusing on the school culture, the ethos and the environment, policy development, working with parents and carers, making sure that there's the pupil voice and everything is co-produced, focusing on staff development to support their own well-being and that of students. Obviously looking at leadership and management, and the provision of targeted pupil support and structures and processes in place in terms of supporting the identification of vulnerable young people within the school. So just to go, there's not scope obviously to go into detail of all of those aspects on the PowerPoint today, but just again to say that in the Mental Health in Schools guide that I'll be referring to at the end in terms of further reading, we outline each of the different areas. So, for example, leadership and management, and then we kind of highlight what good looks like, and then also how this can be achieved in the school. So it takes every single one of those areas, because this has been very much part of our own academic resilience approach, that then we've integrated with Public Health England's focus too. So there's an integration of both. So for each of those areas that you see in front of you, like I say, we highlight what can be done, and then how, what good practice looks like, and then how you can achieve this in the school. So, for example, let's take curriculum planning, teaching and learning to promote resilience. So good looks like all staff who are involved in teaching and learning know which children and young people are more vulnerable at any given time and adjust their interaction with them appropriately. And the curriculum plans promote problem solving and imagining a positive future at every possible opportunity. And this can be achieved by good identification of needs systems, excellent communication systems, and a cultural expectation that this will happen. So it's just really important to have those systems in place where you can first identify those children who are vulnerable, and then what additional support they need in lessons, and then just making sure that everybody in the school is aware of who those children are, and then that they can adjust, like it says, the sessions accordingly to kind of meet those children's needs. And that the curriculum, I guess, isn't it, there's lots of opportunities and ways that we can build mental health or mental health issues into the curriculum, but also that it actually includes things like problem solving. Like I was saying earlier, problem solving is so important, and that it offers hope in terms of imagining that positive future. So as you can see there, it outlines the different areas and then what good practice looks like in terms of those different areas. So we're going to just think through Jodie now, and just take some time to think about what she might need in terms of what individual resilient moves she might need, and also then how we can think about Jodie in terms of a whole school approach. So Jodie is 14 and she's at secondary school, and she really struggles with her anxiety. She struggles to focus in large groups and feels apprehensive around others. She also witnessed her mum in a serious car accident when she was 7 years old, whereby her mum was almost killed. This incident happened the day before her birthday, and then her dad, who is an alcoholic, left the family home. Jodie has an older sister, yet they don't really get on. So yes, now another opportunity to pause the video and just take some time to reflect on Jodie. And like I say, just those questions there, like what are you drawn to first? What might Jodie need in terms of an RT approach? So thinking about the resilience framework, and how might a whole school approach help Jodie? And then we'll come back. So I would say allow a good sort of 10-15 minutes for this, and then we will come back and think through together my thoughts, and you'll have your thoughts as well. It's a shame that I can't hear your thoughts, sadly. I would love to hear your ideas, but yeah, just make sure you've got them down, because I'm sure they'll be really beneficial later down the line. Okay, so welcome back. So just thinking about Jodie then, isn't it? And I did make some notes at the bottom of my PowerPoint, but I'm not actually able to see them. But anyway, so I guess first and foremost, I would just be really thinking about if there's any quick wins around just working with Jodie's anxiety. So, and, you know, doing some individual work with her there, yet also at the same time really taking on board this fact that she struggles to focus in large groups and feels apprehensive around other people. So thinking about what does she need then in terms of the school day that can support her in a different way. Like, is she, you know, and again, all of these things need to be really child and young person led. So I would be meeting, I think great to have a meeting with Jodie and then, you know, see what she needs in terms of her school day. Does she want to come into school slightly after the school day starts? Because maybe getting to school and being around people in the morning could be overwhelming. You know, particularly if journeys are tricky, you know, just thinking about the car accident as well. So I'd really focus on that and work with her about what she needs in terms of the anxiety and the anxiety at school. Then also, thinking about, you know, classrooms and the number of young people that are in the classroom, how this is for her, and actually, is there any way for her to attend sort of nurture groups, or, you know, can, you know, does she need some one-to-one time and support, as well as, like I say, the focus that we would do around the anxiety and supporting her, you know, to manage her anxiety. Perhaps she needs a timeout card as well, so that then if she's in a lesson and I would help her, you know, kind of understand when she starts to, you know, kind of feel wobbly, so that then, you know, allowing her with the timeout pass to go and kind of, you know, access the support that's available in the school, or she may, you know, like I say, kind of, you know, having those strategies that help her calm down, ground herself. And again, if you watch some of the other videos, there's lots of activities and that you can tap into in the other sessions that break down these specific grounding techniques. And ultimately, if somebody's anxious, first and foremost, they need to calm their system. So we need to get that frontal lobe that I was talking about before, the logical part of the brain, that goes offline when we're anxious. So it doesn't work basically when we're anxious. You know, so just things like, so breathing in for 3, hold it for 3, out for 3. You know, that's great as an initial way to just settle the system. Because without that, people then struggle to think logically or rationally. Then I'd think about mum and be thinking about, what does mum need? You know, how is the relationship between Jodie and mum? And also, is there anything that needs to be done there? Does mum need support in accessing any workshops at school, for example, on anxiety, on trauma? She can access the online workshops that we've prepared for you, so that it will help her understand as well. And then also, thinking about mum's needs, and is there perhaps a peer support group for parents whose children are struggling with mental health that they can access within the school, and is that something that mum can tap into? Then obviously, isn't it, there's a lot here also around Jodie's beliefs about herself. You know, what was the impact on all of this, and doing some work on healthy relationships. What does a good relationship look like? And then also, just thinking about how this relationship has impacted on her beliefs about herself. So, and then I guess, isn't it, if within a whole school approach, there's ongoing information, about anxiety or how to cope with anxiety, if that's embedded within the curriculum, having, like I say, kind of, if there's an internal support service that Jodie can access, great. If not, just, regular assemblies on focusing on anxiety, or, doing, we talk about it in a second, but having, kind of when we start the day, doing things like mindfulness, to help us ground ourselves, just all like opportunities, isn't it, within the school day, to kind of get these strategies in, like in the morning, after lunch. After lunch is crucial because obviously, there will be that winding down in the day, the lack of energy after lunch, etc. So any opportunity, isn't it, to kind of build in role modeling these sort of strategies and techniques. And then also, I guess, isn't it, if the whole school, and if she's okay with it, obviously, if as many people as possible in the school are aware that Jodie's suffering, then people can check in with her, just be aware of her, and the more people that are aware, then the more attended to she's going to feel, and the more held and contained, and supported. So, and just making sure that, what would be great for Jodie, I think, as well, is if she's got someone, a port of call, that she can go to throughout the day, that she needs to talk to if anything's coming up for her. And it's important, isn't it, to send that message that there's always time and space, to talk about things. So why then is a whole school approach important for mental health? I'm sure you're well aware. So obviously, a whole school approach recognises that all aspects of the school community can impact positively on the students' health, safety, and well-being. I just think, isn't it, if you've got an approach within the school that is saying, this is really important to us, actually it affects everybody, and actually everybody is responsible for looking after each other, taking care of one another, and actually, if that's the one place, isn't it, in that child's life where they have that, then how great that they have it there, and it's a place then where people feel safe to go. I was just thinking that, the other day, isn't it, about school refusal, for example. Often one of the things that can, that puts children off is because they don't have a safe place to go to in school, or if they're struggling in friendship groups, or so if everybody's aware, and like I say, we're constantly attending to this issue, then hopefully we won't have children like that who are struggling, or then children won't, vulnerable children won't slip through the net. It's you're just constantly being proactive, and the message is, yes, mental health is important to us, and we're here to attend to it. We understand it, and then again, it's reducing that stigma, isn't it, and really normalizes mental health struggles, as well as what good mental health might look like, and then therefore reduces the stigma. Because the thing is, as well, isn't it, is we obviously, children and young people's education is really important, and also if they're struggling, then they're not even going to be able to focus on their education, because it's just going to feel overwhelming. You may have some young people who put their energy into their education as a distraction, but my experience is that distraction is usually temporary. So eventually it's going to feel overwhelming, and then their education will be compromised in some way. School may be the only source of support that the child is able to access. So again, it's just really crucial that that support and that everyone in the school is taking responsibility, and just that all school staff have the skills and knowledge to support these issues around mental health, and that children and young people know that as well. And again, like I say, hopefully then it reduces the likelihood of any children slipping through the net. Sorry, my cat's just intervened. And the important thing about children slipping through the net, isn't it? I certainly know that I was one of those children at school that I didn't tell anyone that I was struggling, and would get down and focus on my work. So it's just when we're thinking about the children, thinking about all children, and isn't it just not necessarily just focusing on the loudest children, that all children can potentially struggle. So it's trying to make aware, be conscious of the quiet people in the room too, because like I say, academic achievers can also have mental health issues as well. And like I was saying before, so in services like CAMHS at the moment, there's lack of capacity in CAMHS, so actually that in itself creates a necessity for a whole school approach. So if we take the basics section on the framework, and then we focus on being safe, for example, and then we're thinking about this with anxiety in mind. So we've got some individual ideas here of things that you can do, and then so helping children understand anxiety, for example, and what happens in their bodies and brains, when they become triggered. And like I said earlier, so we go into more detail in the twilight sessions on trauma and understanding school refusal and anxiety to attend to this in more detail. Another great resource is there's a charity called the Child Therapy Service, and you can access them at www.childtherapyservice.org.uk, and there's loads of packs and activities that you can download at really reasonable cost, that have got loads of activities and sessions in them too. And of course you can go to the Boingboing website, and that goes without saying as well. And we've got lots of resources on there, and one of the resources is called the Resilient Classroom, and there's about 60 activities in there that align themselves to the different compartments of the framework, and then activities that you can use in the classroom. So that's really great for just supporting your ideas about how not only like classroom activities, but also just individual ways of working and supporting people. So so there'll be lots. And it's also then about providing alternative coping strategies for children to help keep themselves safe, when this happens. So then thinking about whole school approaches. So I said earlier about maybe mindfulness to start the day, just some of that, just checking inside what's going on for people, and just doing some deep breathing. And there's loads of resources online for meditation and that you can tap into. Timeout passes for children and young people when they become overwhelmed. Making sure that there's safe rooms or spaces within the school to support them to calm down, and that children know where these are and how to access them. Like I say, having people that children or young people can talk to, who's able to support them to work through their feelings. If you've had people attend the mental health in first aid training, for example, then that's a great resource to tap into those people that have attended that training. If they can be on hand, having assemblies that focus on anxiety, and then letting children know what support is available within the school. And then also, lastly, and actually I think cannot be underestimated really, obviously, isn't it, if children are going into the fight or flight mode, particularly the fight mode, I think can often be misunderstood, just for rage really, or poor behaviour. So I think it's like trying to have an approach or a value system in the school to behaviour management that actually really tries to, just be open, and try and understand, what's the reasons for the behaviour, what's underneath it, as opposed to, just drawing those conclusions that the child is misbehaving. And actually, again, isn't it, if the whole school is working in that way, then, ultimately, over time, it makes it a really safe place, because the child will know that they'll be supported through that and given that help that probably they don't have elsewhere to help them understand what they're feeling. So there's some ideas there just when thinking about anxiety. And like I said before about the mental health in schools guide, what we've done in that is we've broken it down. We've looked at anxiety, we've looked at depression, we've looked at eating difficulties, we've looked at conduct disorder. They're just a few. So I can't stress enough the importance of further reading in terms of just giving you lots of ideas in terms of working in an individual way and a whole school approach. So then if we take focusing on basics again, and then looking at access and transfer support, but say, for example, you've got a child who's living in a domestic violence home. And again, we have a whole separate recording online training session for domestic violence as well. So you can access that for more information. This is just to give you a sample, some things that might need to be considered. So for example, can mum travel to school with the child and feel safe? Or is there a community of parents project that you might set up or have in the school where, like I say, if you are aware that mum lives a few doors down from another mum, and actually has that other mum got capacity to help mum that's in a tricky situation, help her child get to school. It's like, isn't it, how we create a community where everyone is working and supporting each other. Is there any other support that's available from within the school to support mum? Again, thinking about, isn't it, just really breaking it down, or does she need, if there's not access within the community of parents, is there another worker that can support mum to get the child to school? Just is there some other way that she might access support? Like I said earlier, does the child need an alarm clock to get up in the morning? If things are chaotic or difficult in the household, that could be really beneficial. If the mornings are a chaotic time, or the night before, if there's been conflict, does the child need a bit of a wind down when they arrive at school? Because otherwise they could be really tense and hyper, for example. If there's a local transport bus system, it can be worth sometimes specifically inviting people along to attend training sessions, so that then they're aware that, actually children, isn't it, that are getting on their bus could be just coming from a whole host of contexts, and actually then, how we support children, or just making those training sessions, isn't it, specific, to kind of include those issues so people are much more mindful. You might do a survey in the school, thinking about how do the children or parents experience the transport locally, and again, like I say, is there a training gap there for people. So then if you take each of the compartments and just think about how you can create whole school ideas in relation to mental health and RT. So I think first and foremost, thinking about what are the finer details of this issue that need considering. So let's take domestic violence, for example, isn't it? What if we start by understanding what are the impacts of what's the impact on children who live in domestic violence homes? So we know that their social development is often impacted. We know that they're more likely to be, like I say, kind of hyper alert and suffer with anxiety. We know that their relationships might struggle. So actually, if we kind of think about what's the impact, and then kind of use that then to work back, and then in terms of thinking about the framework and thinking about what resilient moves we need to put in place. And then isn't it like maybe then looking at your school as a whole and thinking about how many children are you aware of, isn't it, that are in the school that are in those kind of contexts? So what can be done, like I say, on an individual level, but also then does the resilient move support the whole school? Is what you're thinking about realistic given the resources that are available in the school, or does it mean being a bit more creative, like I say, kind of seeing who's up for being part of a community of parents project where parents help each other out? Is there the energy for that in the school, do you think? Are there any sort of quick wins, something that can be done immediately? Yeah, what's in your local community? Are there opportunities in the community to support this need? Something might have been overlooked previously. The chances are, isn't it, if we go back to the buses analogy, I'm sure there is bus drivers that have got children that are in schools. So kind of getting them on board and seeing if they're up for doing some training or supporting people differently. And the thing is about these things, isn't it, is if we think out the box, we just don't know where these things can end up leading, and then that lovely positive chain reaction that can happen. Or are there any other services that could be enlisted in support of that move that you're thinking? So these are the questions that you can just come back to each time when you're considering. So these are the 10 things that we suggest should be put in place in terms of a resilience-based approach. So like I've said a few times, so making sure that there's at least one trusted adult who lets the pupils know that they hold them in mind and that they care, and who the young person has access to over time, isn't it? If, like I say, for the little children, and for the big children really, if they're leaving a home, and they're leaving that trusted adult, it's important to know that they can go somewhere and speak to someone else at school in order to kind of help them feel safe. And the thing is, sometimes, when these are things that are on offer, then often people don't need to take advantage of them because they know that they're on offer. So then that settles them in itself. So then they can feel safe inside, just knowing that there's somewhere that they can go. Having a willingness and capacity to help with basics, e.g. like food banks or clothing or transport, and even housing, like I was saying before. So, and with the clothing, I just love the idea of like it's called a swish. So where people, just bring in clothes, like everyone, teachers, everyone's got clothes in their closet that they don't wear, or they're hoping they'll get into, particularly us women. Sorry, men, you might also have clothes that you're hoping to get into as well. I have to watch myself there. So just having an opportunity to swap clothes, or just have you got capacity to help, like I say, with things like school uniform. So making sure that people can access school uniform, because, you know, again, holding that social inequalities piece. Again, that applies to things like hobbies as well. So it's one thing, isn't it, thinking, oh yeah, we think it'd be really great for Johnny to do some judo. Yeah, actually, is he even able to just get to the judo lesson in the first place? You know, what is actually going on in mum's life or dad's life? You know, have they actually got capacity to get him there? You know, can they pay for it? So again, isn't it kind of just being aware of these things when we're considering these resilient moves and then putting things in place to help access. I've mentioned a lot about problem solving and the importance of that, creating safe places. So having safe places, you know, where children can go, so that then they can calm down, you know, self-soothe, or like I was saying earlier, they're given that help in terms of thinking through their behaviour or trying to make sense of what's happened, and just, yeah, safe places for those more vulnerable children. Having provision in place to help pupils to cope. So just building things into the curriculum where we teach self-soothing or how to manage our feelings. And all, like I say, this can be also role modelled throughout the day, in different, you know, just even if it's 5-10 minutes, isn't it, after lunch, you know, just thinking about one way in which we, you know, can be kind to ourselves or help ourselves when we're feeling difficult feelings, you know, just like I say, isn't it, so that it just runs throughout the curriculum rather than being a one-off session or approach. Having opportunities to volunteer or have a sense of purpose in the school community. I remember when I was at school, we all had little jobs to do, so things like picking up litter, and actually this can just be, you know, invaluable for children in terms of giving them, say, that sense of purpose. It's that, isn't it, builds that sense of what we call self-efficacy, and the self-efficacy is, yes, I can do. Inviting, you know, everyone to a seminar or a workshop where it's kind of, you know, everyone has a responsibility around resilience. So we let everyone know what resilience is, and empowering the whole school community to understand what it is, and then what everyone can do to support it, like I say, from, you know, the caretaker to the head teacher, and obviously including parents and young people and foster carers, grandparents, whoever's in the child system. And then just making sure that, you know, kind of those resilient moves are, they're based on the individual needs, but they're also joined up in terms of that approach between home, school, and other organisations in the community for those that need it most. So we've come to the end of our presentation today, and as I predicted, it's just under 2 hours. So here's some further reading for you. I just can't recommend this enough, this guide for schools, using a resilience-based approach. It touches on a lot of the things that I've talked about in the presentation, yet also contains so much more, because obviously there's not justice to do. There's not scope to do everything, you know, justice in a 2-hour presentation. So, but you will find, you know, all, like I say, kind of ways of working with those different presentations, how to set up a whole school approach, you know, what co-production means, what it really means. It's all in there. So I think if anything, if you haven't downloaded it already, then that should be top of your list. Resilient Therapy by Hart and Blincoe and Thomas. So Angie Hart, Derek Blincoe and Helen Thomas is a great book, very accessible, and just again outlines this approach. There's a resource that was produced by the Sussex Youth Cabinet, how can you best support mental health and emotional wellbeing at school, and that's also on the Boingboing website. our academic resilience approach, and there's tons and tons of resources on the Boingboing website. Also, like I say, we very much integrated mentally healthy schools, or Public England's work. So the mentally healthy schools.org.uk website is there too. And then there's also the academic resilience audit tool for senior leaders, which is on the Boingboing website as well, which will help you kind of see where you are in terms of this academic resilience approach, and then what further work might need to be done. Well, I hope that's been useful for you. And I guess the great thing is, isn't it, is there is a lot there. So if there is anything that you've missed, or that was, hard to take on board at the time, then you can come back to it and pause the video in certain places and just refresh yourself. So that's great. Okay, well, thank you for taking this time. And like I say, don't forget those other, just keep a watch out. So because we're doing them, obviously we're getting them up as soon as we can, but there will be actually lots of other online videos and resources that tap into some of the other topics that I mentioned as well. Okay, great. Thank you.